There are pains that don't scream, they just silence everything around them, and when grief comes through the door, sometimes it's childhood that goes out the window. That's what happened to two twin brothers who, even surrounded by luxury in an impeccable mansion, refused the essentials: affection, laughter, and even food. The absence of his mother turned that house into a cold castle, where even the meals had no taste. No babysitter stayed, no toys were enough. And his father, a millionaire businessman, took refuge in his work, thinking that it was protecting him, when in fact it was just hiding. But what happens when someone comes in silently, without promising anything, and changes everything? That's what a simple woman did, without a brilliant resume, but with something rare: sensitivity. She didn't bring magic or rules. She brought affection, a blue notebook, and a true ear. This story goes beyond a wealthy home and sad children. It speaks of new beginnings, of emotional connection, of a loving nanny who became an anchor for a family drowning in grief. If you ever thought there was no solution, perhaps this story will prove you wrong. Everything seemed perfect from the outside. A stunning mansion in the countryside of São Paulo, imported cars in the garage, and two twins surrounded by expensive toys and technology. But inside, the silence was deafening. Since the sudden loss of their mother, no smile lasted for long. Lucas and Helena, yes, strong names for children of only 6 years old, had plunged into a childish mourning that no one could reach. They did not cry loudly, but they refused to eat, play, or talk. Every attempt to get close was met with a blank look, and that tore apart anyone who tried to help. His father, Gustavo, a respected businessman in the investment sector, locked himself behind screens, charts, and endless meetings. Traveling was his favorite escape. He delegated everything to his family, including the constant search for someone who could take care of his children. Spoiler: no one could. Nannies came with international resumes, spoke 5 languages, and knew modern pedagogical techniques. But none of them lasted more than 2 weeks. The mansion, although impeccable on the outside, was the scene of a quiet pain, until one last attempt, almost without hope, would change everything, and nothing would ever be the same again. Clara didn't have a brilliant resume or a letter of recommendation full of elaborate compliments. She was a simple woman, soft-spoken and with eyes that knew how to listen more than they judged. She was recommended by Donna Leila, the former housekeeper of the house, who only said one sentence when suggesting her, "She has a gift, Mr. Gustavo, a gift that cannot be taught." The morning Clara arrived, the sky was cloudy and fog covered the high walls of the mansion. She got out of the car with a worn backpack and a blue-covered notebook in her hands. She took her time, looked around the garden, and took a deep breath. She was greeted without enthusiasm. No one believed she would last more than a week. Within a few hours, she knew the names of the employees, where the forgotten toys were, and what the children's most sensitive times were. Observant, Clara noticed the small gestures, the silence in the hallway, the half-drawn drawings. Her presence was slight, but it would soon become essential. She didn't ask invasive questions or impose rigid routines. She simply occupied the spaces with kindness. And in that mansion marked by childhood mourning, the absence of a mother, and the emotional distance from her millionaire father, Clara, the loving nanny, began without fanfare to provoke an emotional transformation that no one predicted. Clara didn't clap, call out their names, or try to win the twins over on the first day. She simply walked into the room where Lucas and Helena were using their tablets and sat on the floor as if she wasn't expecting anything. From her pocket, she took out a folded note with a hand-drawn drawing. 2 little birds sleeping inside a heart-shaped nest. No words, just the drawing, left between them like someone planting something without knowing if it will germinate. Helena's curious eyes blinked for a moment, but soon returned to the screen. Lucas pretended to ignore it. Still, Clara remained there for more than 20 minutes, just rearranging the cushions and watching in silence. On the second day, she took some colored clay and started to mold little animals on the balcony. She didn't invite anyone. She simply left everything there. In the afternoon, Lucas showed up and created a little blue robot. Clara looked at her with true but not exaggerated delight. The next day, it was Helena who came with a pink butterfly in her hands. Without forcing hugs, without demanding affection, just being a constant, calm and predictable presence. And little by little, that seemingly invisible nanny began to build a bond with the children. A bond based on simple gestures, affectionate notes, creative meals and genuine listening. That was where Aunt Clarinha was born, and the beginning of a healthy childhood. The mansion, previously marked by a thick silence, began to emit new sounds, giggles on the stairs, footsteps running through the hallways, plates being scraped clean. The playful food that Clara proposed became routine. She created stories for each ingredient. The carrot was the wand of courage. The rice formed magical stars. The staff started to arrive smiling. It was as if the house breathed differently. The caretaker commented that the garden seemed more flowery. The cook invented new recipes just to see the twins try them. Clara, with her affectionate and serene manner, had infected every corner of the house, and no one could explain how. Gustavo, without even admitting it, started postponing meetings and working from the living room just to hear his children's voices outside. He was no longer just an absent millionaire father. He was slowly trying to be present. And that, for him, was more difficult than any negotiation with investors. There was something about the way Clara arranged the books, the way she folded the forgotten blankets on the couch that gave the house a new meaning. It was as if she was stitching good memories over old wounds. The emotional transformation in this family was not blatant, but it was steady, like roots growing quietly. Enrique, yes, let's call him by the name that destiny seemed to have reserved for this family reunion, began to observe Clara more closely. It wasn't just her care for her children that caught his attention, but the way she looked at the world. There was a silent love in every gesture, a respect for the timing of things. At night, while Clara was organizing the loving notes left by the twins, Enrique would appear in the kitchen with subtle excuses: a glass of water, a warmed-up piece of bread, a question about their routine. She smiled without exaggeration, as if she understood that silence can also be a type of conversation. Little by little, the silences between them became comfortable. Instead of touching, there were lingering glances. Instead of promises, there were conversations about the past, about longing, about how hard it is to move on when the pain still lives in the room. Clara listened without judging. Enrique spoke without rushing. And in this subtle exchange, without big statements, a bond was born that was hard to name. The memory of her mother was still present, and Clara never tried to replace her. On the contrary, she spoke of her gently, truthfully. This made Henry admire her even more. That loving nanny was not only rebuilding the children, she was, without knowing it, restoring color to the heart of a man who had already given up on feeling. It was a cold Tuesday night, one of those when the fireplace becomes the heart of the house. Clara was preparing hot chocolate with cinnamon, and the twins were lying on pillows, listening to yet another of their invented stories. Enrique, quiet, watched from afar. It wasn't the story that moved him. It was the entire scene. When the children fell asleep, he accompanied her to the kitchen, as if he didn't want to say goodbye yet. Clara was washing the cups with slow movements, and Enrique, for the first time, approached her without a practical reason. His eyes were searching for something, perhaps courage. Hers, gently, welcomed what was to come. The kiss was not impatient. It was like everything else between them, calm, honest, full of meaning. A silent gesture, but one that screamed inside both of them. It was not planned nor rehearsed. It happened at the right time in the right place, between two people who no longer knew how to love, but were relearning. After that, neither of them commented. There was no long conversation, no hasty promises. Clara went upstairs with light steps, her heart beating wildly, and Henrique stood there, staring at the empty glass on the table. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel afraid. He felt like staying. Lucas was the first to notice. Children have this silent radar for true feelings. He didn't say anything, but he started to get closer to Clara whenever Enrique approached, as if he were approving with a quiet gesture, without needing to understand everything, just feeling that it felt good. Helena, more sensitive, rested her head on Clara's shoulder one night and whispered, "You're going to stay, right?" There was no demand, only desire. Clara held her hand gently and simply replied, "If it depends on me, yes." The girl smiled and went back to sleep. In that simple answer, there was the promise that mattered most. The next day, the two of them drew a house together with 4 people holding hands and a huge sun high above. Clara kept the paper carefully, as if she knew that there was a symbol of something greater there. That reconstructed family didn't need the same surnames, just real ties. From that moment on, there was no doubt. The twins no longer saw Clara as a nanny who came and went. She was part of their routine with affection, of their bedtime stories, of the breakfast table with fruit cut into funny shapes. She was a maternal presence, not in place of the one who had left, but alongside her memory. The mornings began to have a different rhythm. Henrique would wake up earlier, change his blazer for a t-shirt, and sit at the table before the juice was even ready. Clara would laugh with the twins as she arranged pancakes in the shape of a star. It was the kind of loving routine that had previously seemed unattainable. Now, it was just the beginning of the day. In his free afternoons, Henrique would help water the garden with Lucas or read stories aloud to Helena, with Clara at his side choosing the books. Sometimes they would talk about simple things like the taste of cornmeal cake from their childhood. Other times, they would allow themselves to fall into silences that said more than 1,000 rehearsed sentences. Clara continued with the same lightness as before. She organized the library with the caretaker, taught Helena how to make bracelets with colored beads, and laughed at Lucas's inventions with paint pots and cardboard. Henrique watched with an admiration that grew silently. There was love there, but without urgency, only presence. Love after loss did not come like an avalanche. It came like a breeze. Clara and Henrique did not need to define who they were, because they lived as if they already knew. And while the twins blossomed with each gesture, each note, each spontaneous laugh, the previously icy mansion now seemed like a new home, with soul, warmth, and direction. One Sunday afternoon, Beatrice's parents, her maternal grandparents, announced that they would be visiting. It was the first time since the loss of their daughter. Clara was apprehensive, but she didn't show it. Instead, she prepared a simple cornmeal cake with the twins and arranged napkins with designs they had made. When the grandparents arrived, they found 2 smiling children, holding hands with Clara, and a table set up in the garden. The impact was immediate. Emotion filled the room. Lucas's grandfather cried softly. Helena's grandmother wouldn't let go of her granddaughter's hands. The mansion, once synonymous with longing, now breathed warmth. Enrique watched everything quietly, with tears in his eyes. He knew that this moment was not just about reunions. It was about healing. At the end of the afternoon, his grandmother took Clara aside and whispered with moist eyes, "Thank you for giving them back their lives." Clara just nodded, holding back her tears with a smile. A few days later, Enrique prepared a lunch in the garden. He invited only those closest to him. When he stood up with an envelope in his hand and handed it to Clara, no one knew what to expect. Inside was a drawing made by Helena, 4 people holding hands under a huge heart with the phrase, "Our family." Clara said nothing. She just cried, and that was enough. Clara never tried to erase what existed. On the contrary, she taught that love can fit in more than one place. Beatrice remained alive in the memories, in the questions asked by Helena, in Lucas's drawings. But now, alongside these memories, there was space for new affections, built with care and presence. The mansion, once cold and silent, became a shelter. Breakfast smelled of freshly baked bread and the sound of children's laughter. Clara left notes on the pillows. Enrique brought flowers picked by the children to the table. Everything was simple, but that was exactly its power, to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Over time, no one saw Clara as the nanny anymore. She was the heart of the house, the link between the painful past and a future full of light. Her name was in the drawings on the refrigerator, in the weekend plans, in the stories told before bed. Enrique, he no longer hid it. He had found a new beginning with love, and so that rebuilt family didn't remain perfect, but it remained alive, real, united. The twins' healed childhood, the millionaire father's emotional rebirth, the silent strength of a woman who arrived without promising anything and ended up being everything. Because when love is true, it blooms even where it seemed sterile. How many times have you thought that everything was lost, that there was no more room for smiles, for new beginnings, for affection? Sometimes life puts people in our path who don't come with promises, but with presence. And that's what changes everything. It's not luxury nor time, it's true care. This story reminds us that bonds are built through simple gestures, that a note can heal more than 1,000 words, that love, when born from listening and respect, has the strength to rebuild what seemed ruined. What about you? Have you ever thought about who your Clara was, or if you were ever that person in someone's life? Tell us in the comments, which part of this story touched you the most? Do you believe that love can be born even after loss? Let's talk. And if stories like this warm your heart, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and don't miss the next chapters that will certainly touch you too.